Whether you're Android or iPhone, Windows or Mac, it's hard to deny the impact that Steve Jobs and Apple have had on the tech world over the last 40 years. So here are some intriguing stories about the most valuable company in the world that you might not have known about. We've all heard that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple Computers out of a garage while in their 20s, but did you know that there was a third guy? His name was Ronald Wayne, and when Apple was incorporated in 1976, Wayne was named as a third founder and given a 10% stake. But just 12 days later, he sold his shares for $800. Although it's hard to say exactly how much that would be worth today, if he had held on to his stake, it would be worth many billions of dollars. Ouch. We also know the iconic, minimalistic Apple logo with no text at all, the basics of which really haven't changed for many years. But that wasn't Apple's original logo. In fact, it was Ronald Wayne who designed the first logo, a much more intricate design showing Isaac Newton under a tree with an apple above his head and a banner wrapping around what looks like a regal emblem of sorts. Wayne even tried to work in his signature, but Steve Jobs wasn't having any of that and forced him to remove it. In 1976, the Apple I computer had an official list price of $666.66, a devilish number indeed. Since Steve Wozniak had changed the original price from $667, was he a secret worshiper of the devil, trying to bring the world to the dark side through computer list prices? Nope. He was just a math nerd that loved repeating numbers. Steve Jobs frequently referred to the computer as the bicycle of the mind. The first Macintosh computer released in 1984 broke ground in the home computer market with things like a GUI-driven OS using a single-button mouse, attractive typography, and more. But during development, Steve Jobs didn't want to call it a Macintosh, and instead he and Rod Holt told everyone working on the project it was going to be called the Bicycle instead. Most of the team felt Macintosh was the right name and ignored the order, and we have the Mac name that lives on today. But imagine if Jobs had his way, you could be opening up a Mountain Bike Pro laptop instead. In 1984, Steve Jobs visited the home of Yoko Ono for Sean Lennon's 9th birthday party. His gift to Sean? One of the first Macintoshes off the assembly line. Lucky kid. And although Sean took to MacPaint right away, there was another guest that day who was also intrigued. That was Andy Warhol. And although Andy tried to wave the mouse in the air, Jobs patiently helped him bring the mouse back down to a flat surface. Eventually, Warhol declared, "I drew a circle." If only that circle survived. Multicolored prints of it could be hanging on our walls right alongside those crazy Campbell's soup cans. Cameras and smartphones have become so good, iPhones hold 9 out of the 10 top most popular camera spots on Flickr, including number 1. Many have wished Apple would make a dedicated camera and put the Canons and Nikons of the world in their place, but that's probably never going to happen. Or did it already happen? Apple was actually the first to release a mass-market consumer color digital camera in 1994, the Apple QuickTake 100. Well, sort of. It was actually built by Kodak for Apple, and Jobs got rid of it on his return to Apple in 1997. What's wrong with a binocular-shaped camera? If you are a Mac user, then you are familiar with the Unix-based OS X operating system used today, originally released in 2001. But in 1996, as Apple languished, their CEO Gil Amelio knew they needed a next-generation operating system, which finally came down to 2 choices. NextStep from Jobs' Next Computer Company, or BOS from B Inc., headed up by former Apple executive Jean-Louis Gasset. BOS seemed to be an obvious choice. It had a good design aesthetic, was able to boot in 10 seconds, and played several videos simultaneously. Impressive feats for 90s-era computing. While there were technical and financial reasons why Apple ultimately went with NextStep, the reason they didn't go with BOS is far more interesting. The presentation showdown between NextStep and BOS was held in December of '96 at a Palo Alto hotel in front of Gil Amelio and other Apple execs. Steve Jobs and Avi Tevanian tag-teamed their presentation, dazzling Amelio, tugging at both his technical and artistic heartstrings. Gasset was up second, and acting as though the deal was already his, had no real presentation, essentially saying that everyone knew what BOS could do, and then asked if there were any questions. Gasset lost and has since stated he was glad B was never bought because he, quote, hated Apple's management. Sour grapes? Maybe. Oh, and Jobs despised old Jean-Louis, so that probably felt pretty good. Even though the latest iPhone X has ditched the home button altogether, the singular home button on every other iPhone for the last 10 years has become part of its identity. But did you know that Steve Jobs actually wanted a back button in addition to the home button? According to an architect on the iPhone project, he worked hard to convince Jobs that a single home button would not only be fully functional, but also simpler. We're really glad Jobs was wrong on this one and listened to someone else for a change. Let's face it, Apple's iCloud services have never really been on par with the likes of Google Drive and Dropbox. But did you know that Apple wanted to buy Dropbox and Jobs even got personally involved? In 2009, Jobs asked the founders of Dropbox to meet with him in Cupertino. And although they were made a 9-figure offer, the founders turned him down despite looking to Jobs as a hero. They said they wanted to build something big and they were having fun doing it. Some 8 years later, and Dropbox has yet to turn a real profit. Maybe they should have taken the deal. We still love you, Dropbox. There are tons of interesting stories and lore from the world of Apple, and we have only covered a few. Do you have any fascinating things about Apple or Steve Jobs that you would like to share or have us cover in a future video? Let us know in the comments. We're 2-Bit Da Vinci. Thank you for watching.